Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up, and make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and in this video, I want to be dangerous, right? I want to have a discussion about Iron Man versus Prince Zuko from Avatar. Now, this is not really going to be like a physical fight between the two. If you guys like seeing characters that get into like physical fights, like physical fight versus battles, I have those on Patreon. You'll find the link down in the description. This is more of a discussion on who had the better story arc. I will say that I think a fight between Zuko and Iron Man would be interesting, but it depends on where we're talking about, right? Like if we're talking about Zuko between the time period of the end of the Avatar series and the start of Legend of Korra, assuming that he was able to actually bend lightning as opposed to just redirecting it, then if he can control electricity like a lot of firebenders can do, then he can control, he can create EMPs, right? And there goes Iron Man's suit. Unless Iron Man's wearing one of those EMP protected suits, which I'm not really sure he has because they all seem to run on some form of electricity. I will say this, I think a fight that would be hilarious would be Toph versus Iron Man, right? That fight would be 5 seconds long, right? Iron Man's like, I'm gonna defeat you, Toph, and Toph is like, haha, and then just like crushes him in his own suit. It'd be hilarious, right? That fight would be so fast. But for real and for true, right? Kind of getting into this discussion, these characters are intriguing to me, right? And the reason why is, and really the reason why I chose this is because Iron Man is a character that I think a lot of people enjoy and they like, and Zuko is a character that people who are fans of Avatar are fiercely protective about, right? Like they won't hear a word against him, and it's interesting when it comes to these things. So I kind of want to kick things off with Zuko, right? I want to talk about Zuko for a second. You know, when you're talking about this character, and the funny thing is that within the first season or so, Zuko was a character where he was there, and it became obvious his mission was to like track down and catch Aang, right? And he was doing it for like the honor and the glory of the Fire Nation. But as you began to get more involved with this character, you began to learn that the real desire of Zuko is to prove himself to his dad, right? To prove himself as like, you know, I'm worthy of being the new king of the Fire Kingdom, or like you can rely on me, you know, trying to get his dad's approval. That was a huge focal point for his character. And you look at different episodes, right? You look at like The Awakening, you look at the Winter Solstice, episode 1 and episode 2. You look at Zuko Alone, which a lot of fans of Avatar champion is one of the greatest episodes of the series, if not the absolute best. But you look at these story arcs and you see these huge shifts and these huge changes, right? The relationship between Zuko and Iroh, right? And so in the beginning, Zuko was just hardcore, right? He was just this hardcore guy who by all standards of measurement was a dick, right? And as you get through that, one of the funny things is his pursuit of honor and his pursuit of like, I have to show that I'm worthy of this, is really sort of countered by the fact that Aang is really flying by the seat of his pants, right? Like he's an airbender, he has no idea what he's doing, right? I mean, like, you're the new Avatar, man. Good luck, dude. Hopefully your friends can get you through it. And that was basically it. But as you go through that, you know, you see Aang just kind of getting into these scenarios, these fights with Zuko, and where you do see these moments where you can like champion Aang and be like, yeah, man, he's got these small little bursts of just like, he has a lot of power, he can do some crazy cool things. A lot of it is, in a lot of ways, making Zuko look like a fool, and that makes him even more and more frustrated, right? But the reality of this is that as the show continues on, and as the show, you know, basically goes from, you know, one episode to another episode and one season to another season, you begin to learn that there's a lot more to Zuko than what's going on. And one of the coolest indications of this comes with his encounter with Iroh, right? With his uncle Iroh, where he starts talking to him, and Iroh really kind of says, you have to figure out who you are, man. You can't live your life by somebody else's standards. And that's basically what Zuko was doing, right? He was living his whole life based on his father's standards or his sister's standards or the overall Fire Nation standards, right? He wasn't really living his life based on what Zuko wanted to do. And the reality was that Zuko didn't know what he wanted to do because he'd lived his whole life trying to seek the approval of his father after his mother was gone. And that's what led into these small little moments here and there, right? Like, you know, Iroh bringing in the idea of saying like, this life that you live, one, you only live it once, and two, you have to make it mean something. And if it's going to mean something, make sure it's something that you wholeheartedly believe. If there's a part of you that doesn't believe in the Fire Nation, then it's time for you to explore that. And it's time for you to find out where that's coming from, you know. And then you get these small little flashbacks, right? You kind of go into the story of Zuko alone. You get these small little flashbacks where it's Zuko's flashback to when he was a child, and you learn that the reason why Zuko is you know, really more emotional than you were initially led to believe is because of the moments with his mom, right? Where his father was hard and he was fierce. His mom had a far more gentler hand, right? She was more kind and caring than his father was. And that kind of tenderness led to this sort of emotional aspect of Zuko. And you end up learning that when it came to his emotional side that he was repressed, right? But being out of the Fire Nation and being out there in the world, you end up finding that Zuko is far more emotional and far more complex. More so than that, he has to come face to face with the consequences of not just his actions, but the actions of the Fire Kingdom. And this is a perfect example. This is shown perfectly when he ends up being taken in by that family in the Earth Kingdom, and them not knowing who he is, not knowing that he's a firebender, not knowing that he's the prince of the Fire Nation, not knowing any of that stuff. They take him in, they welcome him in, right? And he starts to kind of come to this realization that people are not inherently bad, right? People don't need to be controlled and all that kind of stuff the way he was taught to believe in the Fire Nation. And he starts to come to this realization that pretty much everything he knows about humanity through the lens that he was given from the Fire Nation is essentially wrong, right? And that people are just trying to make their way in the world, and people are kind and people are caring and that kind of a thing. And it sort of allows him to effectively let his guard down. And this all really comes to a head when you get to the end of the episode, and basically Zuko has to reveal the fact that he is the prince of the Fire Nation. They turn on him like that, right? It's crazy, right? In the blink of an eye, they're like, nope, you're part of the Fire Nation, get out. And they kick him out. The little kid that thought he was awesome is just like, I hate you, right? There's just this such extreme animosity and hatred for the Fire Kingdom, you know, in the Earth Kingdom itself and various other communities, that Zuko has to come to this realization that in reality, he is seen as the bad guy, right? And so now the mission is no longer about, I have to capture the Avatar to gain my honor and to prove my worth to my dad. Now it's not only I need to figure out who I am, where I'm going, what I'm about, I need to prove that I can be a good guy, but I also need to change the image of the Fire Nation, right? The evolution of his character is not done over the span of a single season, right? It's not like Zuko goes from being a villain to a good guy in like one season. It takes place over the course of the entire show, right? And one of the coolest moments with this is that when he ends up getting to the point where he tries to side with the Avatar with the Avatar group, right, with Aang's team, that initially he's rebuked by everybody except for Toph, and Toph's like, nope, she goes to vouch for him and says like, this guy can do us good. We need a firebender to teach Aang how to bend fire, and Zuko's been trying to redeem himself, right? And this pursuit of redemption combined with past mistakes, his life in the Fire Nation, betraying Iroh, different things like that, like it all kind of comes to a head with the fact that he is in effect a good guy now, you know, and being part of that group that goes to war with his own Fire Nation, you know, and basically says like, you guys have become the bad guys, you guys are the enemy now, right? You're not good guys, you're not bringing the world to a better place. Sure, like there'll be no war and conflict and turmoil, but because you've taken away everybody's freedoms and liberties and you've made the world a worse place overall, you know, kind of adopting that ideology and then going to war with the Avatar against his family was a huge moment, right? So you see this total, like this perfect 180 between how Zuko was presented to us versus what he is at the end of the show. And that's kind of the cool thing, is even when he was first introduced, you knew there was something a little more there, right? And like anybody who was a fan watching the show, you kind of you wanted to scratch below the surface and see what was there. And finally, we ultimately ended up getting it. And so his development was incredible, right? It's one of the reasons why a lot of people say that Zuko is one of the greatest literary characters of all time, right? He went from being introduced as a straight up villain to becoming an anti-hero to becoming a hero, right? All over the course of a singular show. That combined with the emotional aspect, right? Him crying, different things like that, just really sort of expanded on the complexity of him. And so from here, I want to switch over to Iron Man, right? Iron Man, Tony Stark he's an interesting character in his own right. Right? I mean, where Zuko has a lot of complexity insofar as like his emotional state, his backstory following that journey, Iron Man has a lot of complexity in what we've learned over the years and what we've seen his character experience both in the comics and in the movies, right? So kind of looking at the comic book counterpart to him, looking at his comic book version, he was pretty straightforward in the early days. And a lot of that was because of the way that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby wrote comics, right? Stan Lee wrote comics in the sense of they were designed to be more lighthearted and kind of a break away from reality, from the struggles of the world, like the Cold War, that fear that kind of went on, different things like that. It was sort of a break away from all that impending nuclear disaster. And it was kind of like, here's an escape that will let you leave the world behind and kind of just go and enjoy comics, right? That kind of a thing. And so when Iron Man was first introduced, most all of you guys know the story, right? He was based on a dare that in the age of anti-industrialism, that Tony Stark could create a character who was himself an industrialist and people would love him, right? You guys know that whole story. And so when Stark was introduced in the comics, we kind of of got his sort of turnabout in the sense of him becoming a tried and true superhero in one issue, right? In his original appearance, right? And for the most part, the comics followed the movies almost identically. The only real difference there is the comics took place during Vietnam. The movie took place in the Middle East, right? But you end up finding out, of course, Tony being a weapons manufacturer, that his weapons had been used for various purposes, and not all of them were good. A lot of them were nefarious, hence the nature of weapons. And the result of this is that he was ultimately taken prisoner and then ended up meeting a guy named Yo Henson. And the truth is that, Ho Jensen rather. And the truth is that much like Iroh's encounter with Zuko, Ho Jensen was kind of like, you have to learn there's something greater than yourself here, right? Like your pursuit of whatever this is, money or power or women, fame, all of the above, right? Like that's not the end all be all. And when the time comes when you die and you look back on your life, do you want to see a life pursued with superficial things, or do you want to see a life that was pursued and meant something, right? And so this ended up leading to Tony Stark effectively turning over a new leaf and becoming a good guy. Now this goes into the post, Stark industrialist era and goes into him becoming a new hero, or becoming a hero in general, right? So the new era of Tony Stark. And the truth is, as much as I love comics, there isn't a whole lot going there, right? I mean, there's a few arcs here and there. For example, like Demon in a Bottle, the idea that Iron Man's alcoholism was essentially catching up to him and really came to a head in that story, in the sense that it was basically eroding and taking away and ruining everything about his life that he loved. And so he had to find a way to get that in check. And stories like Armor Wars, where his technology, his Stark tech was being taken. For the character of Iron Man as a whole, the idea of James Rhodes replacing Tony Stark, there were some cool moments that went on there. I think in the modern era, there's a lot more interesting stories, right? The Secret Origin of Tony Stark by Kieran Gillen, where you learn that Tony's not the biological son of Howard and Maria. Instead, that person is Arno, and that Tony was adopted. You get into Iron Man International by Bryan Michael Bendis. You end up learning that he tracks down and locates his biological mom, who's still a part of his comic book story, which is currently being written by Dan Slott. You see all these kind of changes and these cool moments, and you get to see Tony Stark as just a tried and true dick, right? During Tom Taylor's Superior Iron Man run, where he uses the extremist technology as a means to give people the ability to look beautiful in the city of San Francisco for one day. And then following that day, they have to pay $99 per day in order to continue using the app. And then the city descends into madness, right? The app becomes like a drug and people just want to go back to being beautiful again, right? So people are attacking each other and robbing each other, doing whatever they can in order to get that money to pay that app for the day. You go into like Matt Fraction's 5 Nightmares, right? These things where you learn Tony Stark's true, 5 real nightmares that are out there. The extremist story itself, you have a lot of really great moments there. But the truth is that in terms of the progression of Tony, there's only ever a few landmark stories, right? Demon in a Bottle, we already mentioned that. Civil War by Mark Miller and the included tie-ins with the Iron Man comic itself, where he reveals to the world, like he basically stands up to the world and says, I'm an alcoholic. One of the first real moments in comics where he effectively addresses it on a broad scale. These are cool and interesting moments. The death of Happy Hogan, Pepper Potts leaving him. But the reality of this, and the reason why I give this victory to Zuko, is because you don't really see Stark progress in the same way that Zuko did, right? There is the element of Stark trying to prove himself being as good or better than his father, but that's not the overarching arc, right? That's not the overarching theme, right? Tony Stark, like a lot of other comic book heroes out there, is designed to fight a particular villain. And when that story's done, you move on to the next story. That's especially prominent in the modern age, when a lot of writers like Chris Claremont and Roy Thomas and Bill Mantlo and Peter David are a thing of the past. And so you don't really see these super complex stories that focus just as much on the fighting as they do on the character development itself, right? That's kind of gone away. Instead, it's just kind of like, here's 6 issues where Iron Man fights a guy and then he wins, and here's the next 6 issue where he fights another guy and then he wins, and it just kind of goes on, with regards to that kind of repeating pattern. But nonetheless, it's Tony Stark is a great character. He's super intriguing. He's very interesting. I will say that I think Tony Stark in the movies is far more developed and far more interesting and more complex than he ever really was in the comics. And a lot of that's because of the fact that the movie, the 10 years that we've saw this Marvel Cinematic Universe going on, it was in effect the story of Tony Stark is really what it was, right? The idea that he goes from being a weapons manufacturer, seeing what impact it has on the world, the fact that Stark Industries is considered to be a negative company, essentially. Like, people are only a part of it because of the money it generates, but in terms of of its moral perception and its moral place in the world, it's the bad guy, basically. And going from that, abandoning that, becoming a superhero, trying to do some good, and then making mistakes along the way, right? The idea of trying to harness artificial intelligence, leading to the creation of Ultron, different things like that, right? And then ultimately making the call to sacrifice his own life for the purpose of saving the world. Or really saving the universe. There's a lot of development there, right? So he was far more developed in the movies than I think he ever really was in the comics. But still, in comparison to someone like Zuko, whose journey we follow and whose journey is so exceedingly emotional, and whose father we can replace with our own fathers or a particular event, a particular scenario, those things are kind of interchangeable. It makes Zuko relatable in a way that Tony Stark just isn't, right? It makes him relatable, it makes him tangible, because depending on where you're coming from in your life and what experiences you've had, you could be Zuko, right? Like you could be that guy, right? This idea that you're trying to prove yourself for a particular cause or to a particular person, whatever that happens to be, your family, your friends, somebody that you know, your employer or what have you. And along the way, you end up having either somebody come into your life or circumstances that are introduced in such a way that it changes your mindset and forces you to accept that, one, you don't know who you are, you don't know where you're going, you don't know what you want, and you've been wasting your time by not figuring that out. And so you do like Zuko did, you effectively leave everything behind. You go on this journey of self-discovery, right? And you learn all these things about yourself only to find that who you are hates who you've been. And so it's awesome to kind of see that sort of progression with his character, right? And so again, I give the victory to Zuko here. He's just far more complex, he's way more developed, and in overall, he's probably one of the greatest literary characters that's ever been created in terms of a person starting out as a villain, becoming an anti-hero, and then becoming a full-on hero. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button and become part of the Rob Corps. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. And I will catch you all later. Peace.